So the English department hosts a variety of literary events throughout the academic year. It's for our graduate and undergraduate students, but also for the cultural enrichment of our community. So please check with our creative writing website and our Facebook page often for more information about upcoming events. We have readings by visiting writers, by faculty members, by students. For example, next week, Friday, November 4th, we will have a reading by 3 award-winning poets, Catherine Nurnberger, Laura Reed, and Maya Jewel Zeller. They'll be reading at Book People on Friday at 7 p.m. And then the following Monday, filmmakers Vern Lott and Jennifer Anderson will be screening their documentary, The Act of Becoming, which chronicles the rise of the American novel Stoner from out of print to international bestseller. And to look further ahead, during spring semester, we'll be hosting another distinguished visiting writer, poet Mary Zybist, as well as the annual Hemingway Festival. And also, please note, if you have not yet obtained a copy of Benjamin Busch's memoir, Dust to Dust, copies are available for purchase in the lobby so that you can have it ready for signing after the reading. And Carol of Book People is out there. She'll gladly assist you. But for now, I will turn things over to Paul Warmbier, who will be introducing our distinguished guest. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It is my honor tonight to introduce our distinguished visiting writer, Benjamin Busch. Benjamin is a poet, essayist, memoirist, actor, photographer, teacher, film director, Marine infantry officer. I think I got just about everything. Benjamin's writing has appeared in Harper's, Michigan Quarterly Review, Prairie Schooner, NPR's All Things Considered, The Washington Post, and much, much more. His memoir, Dust to Dust, was published by Echo Harper Collins in 2013. Benjamin is a recipient of various awards in the world of writing, filmmaking, visual art, and others. He's been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize, as well as notable mentions in numerous journals and anthologies. Benjamin also teaches alongside fellow veteran and poet Brian Turner here in Nevada College. In the Marine Corps, Benjamin served many years as an infantry and light armored reconnaissance officer and deployed twice to Iraq. So in short, he's kind of a big deal. In Dust to Dust, we do not find ourselves dwelling on the war, however. On the bullets and bombs as the focal epicenter, as I expected at the offset. Benjamin jumps through his life, exploring his and our relationships through dust, steel, soil, bone, and wood. He gives us life as fragmented memories of childhood and family to help us understand why he made the choices he did and how those choices would inevitably lead him to war, to lead men into the chaos and horror of war, and how they led him back through the dust and blood of Ramadi, eventually home to what he left behind. By the end, we begin to adapt to his storytelling, his triumph, his loss, and our losses into our lives. He finds the universal not just for those struggling with the aftermath of war, but others' losses as well. Despite the short time here, we in the workshop class he's been teaching have been privileged with Benjamin's guidance in the classroom. It's been clear that he is here just for us. Not self-promotion, not egotism, just us. The importance of troop welfare, which I'm sure he obsessed over as a Marine officer, comes across in the classroom where his students' success and growth are of supreme importance. Even in a week-long workshop, Benjamin pulls no punches, wastes no time, but tells it because hard and constructive honesty is what's needed to grow and evolve. This week, working with Benjamin and reading Dust to Dust, I have been reminded of what I miss most about my time in the Marine Corps and the camaraderie earned through labor and struggle. You are all in for a real treat tonight. Please help me welcome Benjamin Busch.
you have been generous, and it's been a great pleasure to be here in Idaho. I'm so thankful to the University of Iowa, especially the English department and the FA program, to have been able to meet so many of your writers, especially, but also filmmakers and students in various pursuit of becoming larger people. It's been really exciting. And I've never seen the blues before. So I now feel like I'm able to sail on dirt, which should be necessary to pilot such a ship. So Dust to Dust was certainly a quirky book when it came out in 2012. And I'll just describe it very briefly. I put it together from pieces, from fragments, which is kind of how I think. And I wanted to draw connections always from small moments and observations in my life to these things which, always reach for immensity, always reach for the universal, as Paul has said. I really want that to happen. I want these moments to be much larger than my single view of them. And it is a single view book. I'm always looking at something. And small things add up. You kind of have to earn the book's end by reading your way through it. So each chapter follows a theme, whether it's water or metal, and begins in childhood and moves to adulthood along that theme. And they were the things that I noticed most as a child, and ended up realizing that the things I noticed most as a child I've noticed my whole life. It's just the way I was imprinted. And so I seek them in my environment. And it became an entire journey. So I hope for those of you who read it, it becomes some kind of an echo or reflection of your own, no matter where you grew up and what you do. We are on a journey of a limited scope. What you find in my work always is that the thing I despise most is impermanence and mortality. Two things which are almost inevitable, but that we as people resist for every day that we get, right? We don't quit in our pursuit to not be dead. So, one thing you need to know also is that my parents were constantly observers of my recurring death. I was playing war in the backyard. My pacifist parents had to continually watch me perish in war games. They wouldn't allow me to have a gun, so I was even more handicapped. And I was still trying to be a martial creature for much of my youth. So my father, who was a writer, ended up taking a London study group, which if you can get on a study group, please go travel. And I ended up in this is young grade school in England, where they're very serious about their plays. And I come from America, where we're not quite so much. And this was our big chance. We're going to do a play about Roman Britain. And I'll read this little section from the first chapter, and we'll kind of see how the echoes in my book move around, how these things kind of gain some gravity over time. So I'm in London. I attended school there. My class spent a year studying Roman Britain. The teachers organized a play about Queen Boudica, an early Celtic leader of the Iceni tribe who fought heroically against Roman control in Britain. We could either be legionnaires or Celts. I wanted to be in the legion, but I was cast as one of Boudica's warriors. We were referred to as barbarians, not Celts, taking on the name given to unruly peoples north of Rome, and we were considered a horde instead of an army. It seemed yet another step down. We were sent home a list of things to make and instructions for how to dress for the play. I showed the requirements to my father, who looked at them as if he couldn't read, and handed them to my mother. Shield, sword, belt, dark cloak. To make a shield, she gave me a large piece of cardboard from the grocery box, and we covered up the tomatoes printed on it with glue and brown butcher's paper. I said a warrior, barbarian or not, would never emblazon his shield with vegetables. I drew undersized dragons on it, which looked like smudges at a distance. My mother had found some black material, which she had wrapped over one shoulder and fastened around my waist on the opposite side with a safety pin. I wore brown shorts, no shirt, and one of my father's belts wrapped almost twice around my hips. Last was my sword. My mother was at a loss for how to make a sword. We finally just cut up strips of cardboard, glued them together, and wrapped them in black plastic from a garbage bag. It looked terrible. My costume might have done well in America where expectations were low, but when I arrived at school, I was immediately ashamed. Some of the children came in elaborate armor that looked like accurate replicas of Roman uniforms. Their parents had spent weeks working on them, and the children were afraid to move much for fear of tearing something that had been carefully glued. The barbarians ranged in their interpretation, and we looked somewhat like a horde. The teachers had built an impressive wooden chariot, as well as 2 matching horse costumes with papier-mâché heads and brown cloth bodies, each worn over 2 men. Half blind, they pulled the chariot around the room with the girl who played the queen standing in it, and we followed. We rehearsed for days. My part consisted of nothing more than following Boudica's chariot into the room, chanting angry nonsense, waving my embarrassing sword, lining up against the Romans, and then charging to my dramatic death. On the day of the performance, for 100 parents, the staff, and several hundred students, we dressed in our classroom as the Romans marched into the auditorium. The legion stood shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the stage. They looked wonderfully imperial. But I was relieved not to have been chosen for Rome. I could imagine how my armor would have looked if I'd been left to craft it from a tomato box. We assembled in the hall outside while speeches were made inside. At some point, we were given a signal and made our entrance. My parents said that as we came in yelling, I was the barbarian most noticeably smiling. Boudica gave her speech about liberty, and then we were to attack the Roman ranks, failing to achieve our freedom. I rushed up the steps at a boy wearing imposing leather Roman armor and made an uncomfortable slash at me. This was my cue to perish. In rehearsals, I had gone through the motions, pretending slowly to pretend, but this was the performance. I threw myself backward with a scream, my feet coming off the stage, sword and shield tossed into the air. I struck the oak floor on my back with a smack that sounded loud even to me. I was told afterward that half of the parents stood up, and the play went silent with a gasp. I lay unmoving, arms extended, eyes closed, laboring to control my breath. A teacher hurried to my side and stooped, trying very hard not to sound hysterical. "Can you hear me, Dick?" she asked. She had her hand on my chest. It was cold. "Yes," I hissed, trying not to move my lips. "Are your hands, sweetie? Can you move?" "I've been killed," I whispered, keeping my eyes closed. The teacher withdrew. I heard my mother's voice in consultation with her, and the play went on. More boys falling carefully on the floor at the foot of the stage, constraining sword strokes of boys dressed too well for fighting. Queen Boudica, seeing all of her men killed, made another speech, drank poison, slumped in her chariot, and was pulled out of the room by teachers dressed as horses. I had pretended at war again, and had again been killed in front of my parents. It was my first memorable public performance, and a blend of the 2 professions I would go on to pursue most seriously. So we jump around, because that's what we do with memory. And now, I'm at Vassar College as a studio art major. And as you might guess, Vassar has not produced a Marine officer since its creation in 1861. And out in the College Center, the 2 very unfortunate Marine officers were required to go to every college on career day and sit in the student office, open center, with their terrible little pamphlets of people who look miserable, guys doing pull-ups and grimacing, pretty lousy ad campaign we had for the Marine Corps. And in front of them were about 25 students from the Peace and Conflict Studies group who were dressed in white sheets with red paint thrown over them, and they were recreating a massacre in front of the Marine officers as if the Marine officers were killing them all. So there was a pile of dead students that I had to step over and say, I would really like one of your pamphlets, I'm interested in your program. And you get to see the absolute professionalism of disbelief as they thought I was in another part of the show. And then I called, and there must have been one of the greatest silences in a recruiting office in history. We got someone from Vassar. You can say it again. Yes, sir. So here I go, in between my junior and senior year, while everyone else was in Europe. Despite discouragements of military recruiting on campus, I found my way into the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School this summer after my junior year. I sat with several hundred other young officer candidates from colleges around the country in a hot metal classroom in Quantico, Virginia. The commanding officer of the school was to make a speech. It was one line. Attrition is the mission. There was a silence, and we waited for him to say more. Perhaps something loud in our interest in service to the nation, or something inspiring to encourage us through the next 10 weeks. There was no more, and he stepped away. We glanced at one another. He was not referring to an enemy. Within 6 weeks, we would lose 40% of the young men in the room. The door slammed behind him, and the instructor's wing began to scream. We went into complete disarray. As I was pressed out of a door called a hatch, from that moment forth, I turned to see an instructor hurl a chair. We were reformed into platoons outside of the parade deck. The ground was called the deck from then on. And we remained ill at ease for the rest of the summer in a land we had all the wrong names for. I had arrived after an undistinguished year as president of my class, and the recruiter had made much comedy of President Bush from Vassar joining the Marines. George H.W. Bush was president then. There was a certain delight in the persecution I received due to being a Vassar student, and once I made the mistake of taking pride in it. We rarely saw an officer. The appearance of one was built to be an event, an almost spiritual witness to something near perfect. It was on such an occasion that my sense of humor reflected poorly upon me. We were being inspected by the captain, and we had been polishing brass belts, buckles, and black leather boots all morning. We had ironed for hours the night before and had burned every loose green thread back into the cotton camouflage uniforms with lighters. We lined up, and the officer made his way around the squad bay, one officer candidate at a time. He was preceded by a gunnery sergeant and followed by a staff sergeant. They were immaculate. We were found individually and collectively to be a mess. We were not to make eye contact, even if we were eye to eye. We were also not to look away. I stood in attention, seeing nothing, as doom converged on me. We were to greet the officer with our college and contract. I said Vassar. There are only two types of contract, air and ground, but I said infantry instead of ground. I was nervous and said both school and contract without pause in between, so it sounded like Vassar infantry. Few words were less likely to appear together. The captain paused as he looked at my uniform. He continued not to look at my face. His brow bent slightly, and I could tell that something I said was wrong. I thought that it was infantry. Not to be rude, Candidate Bush, he said, but isn't Vassar a girls' school? He meant it as a serious question. Not everyone knew that Vassar had been co-ed for 20 years, but I thought that this was my moment to prove that I was unafraid. Someone with pride in his school, able to stand up to what was unintended as a joke. I said, and said too loudly, "Women's college, sir!" The women at Vassar had already trained me to correct the term girls' school when I heard it. The staff sergeant's head spun, and he looked at me as if an octopus had come out of my face. The captain nodded, looked straight into my eyes, and stepped away to the next candidate. I stood in a hush, the other candidates waiting for me to be killed as the staff sergeant stepped in front of me and turned, one pace behind his commander. He was shorter than I, and though I just stared over the top of his head, I could sense his wrath. He was almost trembling. That night, after a day spent crawling in a swamp wearing the uniforms to be cleaned with such care for the inspection, I was told to push on the floor until the building sank. I thought that I would have a heart attack from doing push-ups. My suffering was eventually ended, and I was sent to my rep by a amused instructor who said, "I got a joke for you." I stood waiting, my arms dead at my side for him to tell me, but he turned and walked away. I was the joke. So, the way this book moves is that it continually moves. I jump forward many chapters to still being at Officer Candidate School. One day they showed us slides of lieutenants killed in Vietnam. They were taken by coroners for records of some kind, and the images were macabre. Just dead men laid on white cloth somewhere. The pictures were flashed as a slideshow given near the week when candidates were allowed to quit. The images were meant to scare us, and they should have. An instructor paced as the dead appeared and screamed behind him. "This is a consequence of your job," he began. "These Marine lieutenants were all leading their platoons, and this was their reward. You should expect no less. There's a bullet waiting for every one of you, and it's up to the one shooting to miss because you can't dodge it when it comes. You'll be in front, first to go and last to know." An image came up of a man who had been hit in the face with an RPG. A softball-sized hole clean through the middle of his inflated head. His cartoon features ballooned to each side of it. His last words were, "Follow me, and those will be yours, candidates." The mangled bodies continued to appear, one with a young, peaceful face that showed no trauma. He looked to be asleep and unharmed. Below his shoulders, there was no body. Our last forced march through the Virginia forest, it was in the high 90s, saturated with humidity. My ankle hurt, but my boot kept it supported. I was severely dehydrated, heat stroke rising me as we got to the end and caught sight of the parade deck, the last place I had to stand. Several candidates had already fallen. My heart was racing with blood that must have been thick as oil. I got dizzy. Everything was too bright. I thought of the lights as I went into surgery for my knee in high school, the dead lieutenants. We assembled on the paved lot in ranks, exhausted, exultant, above ourselves. One of our instructors walked the lines. I kept my knees slightly bent as I'd been told to avoid toppling. I closed my eyes for a moment and opened them to find him staring into my face. "You can sleep when you're dead, women's college," he said and stepped away. I forgot to pass out. He was uncharacteristically pleasant. It was his last wasted day of yelling at us. We were not being trained. We were merely being thinned out. The instructors probably had a feeling of diminished returns in their time, but they played their role and we never knew how much of it was an act. He stood and did an impersonation of the instructor, Full Metal Jacket. "What makes the grass green?" At the top of our lungs, and with true elation, we screamed, "Blood! Blood! Blood!" Welcome to the Marine Corps. And that's how you make a Marine, right? You can take an art student from Vassar College and train them. That's the amazing thing about being 18, right? You begin to see how this builds up. We're still not in consequence, right? I'll always be discussing consequence. I'm always getting closer to it. The book is always trying to get you closer to it. So, after I was in the Marine Corps active duty for a while, I got out, went to the reserves, started working in film again, that I always wanted to do when I was young. And so this is that play making its own echo, right? Catch your breath. After a 3-year tour at Camp Lejeune in the infantry, my wife and I moved into a little house in College Park, Maryland, our first home together. I had wanted to audition for Homicide, Life in the Street, because it was a good television show. It was filmed in Baltimore, only 30 minutes from our house. It was, in fact, the only local show at the time, and it was probably the only chance I had at a significant role. I'd given my headshots to the casting agent months before, and I was called in to play extra. They said nothing more than that I would need to wear shorts, bring slippers, and a bathrobe. That sounds bad, doesn't it? I should have known. I arrived on set excited to be in the middle of the production, and a production assistant boarded me onto a van to go to hair and makeup. I was informed that I was to play a corpse, which was disappointing. I sat shirtless as my death was applied to me. I was covered with pale paste where they thought I would be seen in a partially unzipped body bag. And a large hatchet wound was sculpted onto my forehead with wax and opaque shades of blood paints. It was an impressive wound. I dressed in my bathrobe and slippers and went to set. In a small warehouse separated from the Baltimore harbor by a dock where the water ride stopped was the morgue. It had been built for the show, which often brought its detectives there to examine the fictitious dead. There were extras milling around in lab coats and film crews setting up the room for the shoot. I was directed to a stainless steel table, and I carefully slid into the body bag. Even though the room was heated, the table was still cold. Another extra sat beside me with a pad, as if taking notes on what could only be the most obvious cause of death in history. As I lay there, I did not participate in the bored banter of the other insignificant players and corpses. I wanted to be noted as professional and focused. I heard the actors speak their lines for camera tests while I kept my eyes closed. Then standing, stepped in as lighting was adjusted, and the actors rested or continued rehearsing elsewhere. I remained on the table. I did not speak. I waited as the actors were brought back and filming began. I held my breath and controlled my instinct to shiver until they called a cut. If anyone had seen me, they would believe that I was not alive. They began to shuttle people away for lunch, which was set up somewhere down the street, and the actors disappeared along with the crew. I lay on the table. I had no intention of moving until directed to do so. The lights clicked off, and the warehouse grew quiet. I could hear footsteps in the back and things being moved, but the set was abandoned. I sat up in the body bag. I was alone. I had not followed the herd out of the building to wait for rides and been left behind. It occurred to me that no one was going to direct me anywhere. I slipped out of the bag and off the table, walked backstage, found my bathrobe and slippers, and walked outside. It was December in Baltimore, bitter cold, and I didn't know the area very well. A member of the crew was walking back with a plate, and I asked if there was a shuttle coming. He seemed surprised to see me and gave directions to the church where catering was laid out. I'd have to walk. I began to head up the street in my bathrobe and slippers, my bare legs feeling strange as the cold wind struck them. I felt remarkably exposed. I walked across 10th Street where people were Christmas shopping and felt myself being noticed. I smiled at couples as they stared, unsure of what they thought they were witnessing. I'd forgotten how my head must have looked. There were many homeless people stumbling around Baltimore, mad with drugs or savage with long disregard. I could have been one of them, insane with imaginary heat and the chill of winter. I arrived at the church where the vans were parked and went in the front entrance. As I stepped through the large wooden doors, I looked directly into a classroom of black children who promptly went silent. It took me a moment to see that lunch was downstairs, in the church basement. I stood, blanched, a gaping wound on my forehead, in a bathrobe. The children stared as the dead white man descended the stairs and joined the rest of the damned beneath the church. After we ate, the shuttle returned us to the set where I lay back on the table and they finished the scene. Afterward, hair and makeup was too busy, so they gave me some wipes designed for removing makeup and I dressed in my regular clothes. I drove home with the makeup on. I stopped at a 7-Eleven near our house and bought a soda. The Pakistani clerk gave me my change and pretended not to notice that I had been killed. He was very polite. At home, I looked at myself in the mirror. It was good work. The split skin on my forehead, the drained color of my face. I began to wash it off at the sink. I my skin red with rubbing, and the wax wound shaved off with a butter knife. I was alive again. Later, I watched the episode, eager to see my performance as a dead man. I appeared briefly in the background, out of focus, unrecognizable, my wound unnoticeable, and all the attention paid to the details surrounding me were impossible to see. I was as the dead are, blurred, transformed, faded. A year later, I was called in to audition for a serial killer and returned to the set in Baltimore. In the series finale, in winter again, I was killed, the last homicide on the show, and I lay for hours in a pool of red syrup, my hair actually frozen to the sidewalk. I lay there between takes as the crew piled blankets on me. I wanted to be a professional. I didn't complain when I didn't move. I held my breath while they rolled film. When the episode aired, my parents said that they couldn't watch. And so we move around a little bit more. That's what this book does, is it accumulates. There's always a moment which will echo somewhere else. This is back from bone. Now, this is years later in Ramadi, Iraq, capital of the Anbar province, one city up from Fallujah. And it was a bloodbath. And of course, I was still a city guard major, who was a Marine. And I'm along the Euphrates River, Camp Hurricane Point. A boat was nearby, its stern pushed up on the bank and its bow sunk, angled sharply underwater as if preparing to dive, its pilot booth facing down into the river. The boat had once systematically dredged and gathered sediment from the base of the dam, redepositing it on shore. This so drew my attention. It seemed as if it had been sifted, the piles of fine gray filings, larger than dust and smaller than sand. It looked like pulverized lead and was so completely dry that I could not imagine it wet, moving in the river. We were using the deposits of sediment as quarry for fortifying outposts in the city. As I headed back to the headquarters, Marines were stacking sandbags heavy with the bottom of the Euphrates. We were building barricades to protect ourselves from Iraq. Iraqi silt and American bags kept us from one another. It was hot outside, the sun bright. We were living in graves, our bones still slick with blood and held alert by muscle to keep us from their rest. It would not be so much for us to lie down and go quiet, the bags emptying mountains over us. A mile downriver, the bodies of people with names were kept in the new morgue beside the Saddam Hospital, renamed Ramadi Hospital. But those that were brought in from the city were left in a trailer outside. The corpses were laid on the floor of what had been a refrigerated trailer of a meat truck, but the air conditioner no longer worked. I would have to check the morgue each week and photograph the unclaimed bodies. There were foreign fighters killed by the United States in gun battles, people killed in car accidents on a highway nearby, murders, homeless children caught in crossfires they used to lay bombs, and women who died as victims of family shame. Some of the men had been tortured. None of them had any identification. I was looking for Iraqi contractors and city political leaders who would often go missing for ransom, rivalry, or terrorism. Rarely would we find anyone we were looking for, but I always found someone who was missing from somewhere. It was 100 degrees or more in the summer, and I would put on a dust mask, which was useless, and carefully climb into the boiling trailer on the side of the door that did not have the liquids of bodies dripping slowly from it. I squinted as though the smell hurt my eyes. It didn't, but somehow I felt that I must squint, closing up as much of myself as possible. I would hold my breath before going in and come out to breathe. The bodies would be blackened, but not by fire, their teeth glowing white as the skin tightened and pulled from their mouths. Their eyes lost volume and the lids would sink, eventually cracking open to reveal that the sockets had emptied. White molds were spreading over their faces. The corpses would remain strewn on the floor for 30 days, and then be taken south of Ramadi and buried in mass without a marker by the Iraqis. I never touched the dead where they lay, wearing numbers and waiting to be covered with earth. I was a foreigner sent to witness the end of these unknown. I could not know if it was important that we knew who they were after they were dead. In their heads, their memories were quietly rotting. It is for a brief moment that the living and dead should share the surface. These dead had stayed too long. If I stayed in the trailer, I might see them shed their skin and break into pieces. I could watch dust and earth conclude on the floor and lay until someone opened the door again. I sometimes imagine now, with the entire earth just beneath us as a layer of bones we've left. It begins in the Thames River and runs under the ocean, under the fields, forests, and deserts. In the blown dust in the bottom of ponds, the bones are always there. We brought them to the war and left them. But that's not all. That's what this book does, if you're wondering. It keeps on going toward all these ideas that I've had always about mortality, about the consumption of us by the world, about our resistance to it, about our best hopes, and what we get. And this is kind of a little statement buried in Bone, the chapter of Bone, which I'll read because it makes sense after that, even though it appears before that in the book. I knew that the world was wearing down, and that what was worn off was piling up. I wanted it to be imbalanced in favor of piles, the cumulative, somehow increasing more quickly than reductive. The earth expanding, our work contributing to a rise in the land. To think this way, you can never visit the shores of the sea where the collision of mass is so visible. The solidity of rock can be seen being randomly damaged, the violence of water so continuous, the planet's instability revealed to be obvious, and we are content only because we live lives too short to register the speed of ruin. We tread the dead, some so long in the earth as to have become stone. But we only think of the few we have buried, the ones we have witnessed being buried. Every time I dig, I expect to find bones. But I know that the rest of us becomes unremarkable, reduced to fertile dirt. Our skulls empty of all our wonder, our hollowed eyes, unable to be amazed by the absolute dark of the underground, unable to remember or to be afraid. So I do that too. Dead silence in here. I just buried you all, didn't I? Forgive me. Let me give you life again. We probably got something to bring us up a little bit, yeah? Sorry. You should never spend too long in my head. What do you think, Mike? Bees or airplanes?
Oh, airplanes.
So let it be written. It shall be read. Dramatic pause. Forgive me and my hair, we've been talking all day. It's been a windy day too. So, I had volume issues. This begins chapter 3 called Metal. And this is back when my father was taking us to England for yet another London study group. We lived in Edgware, which is a really crappy suburb of London. And so there I was. I quickly found a way to make myself miserable. And of course, I planned for a solution to that. In 1976, we lived in Edgware, England, and I quickly determined that I was not going to stay. My father was chaperoning students for a university study group, and I went to the local elementary school where we sang Onward Christian Soldiers together in the gymnasium each morning and did not recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The boys in school called me Yank, and I had the impression that they meant it not as a term of endearment. There was considerable laughing involved at my expense. I responded with Brit, but they seemed proud to receive the title. I hadn't heard Yankee before and had no idea what a Yankee was, shy of his appearance in Doodle Dandy, which I began to imagine was even worse. I was the only American in the school. I began to exaggerate the cultural differences I was accused of having and spoke with a heavy Texas accent, like a cowboy in a Western film. I decided that it was insulting to be labeled a Yank, cloaked myself in national pride, and asked my father for a retort he deemed to be of equal force. He pondered it for a while, probably weighing language, balancing acceptable words against my insistence that it had given something offensive. He finally said that sometimes British sailors were called limeys because they'd eaten limes to avoid scurvy at sea. He didn't elaborate on what exactly scurvy was, but limey sounded rude enough to me. I went to school the next day enlivened by my secret reply and desperate to use it as soon as possible. I was shunned from a game of Thunderbirds, a British television show being played with wooden blocks. My exclusion was due only to my race, Yank. I became gleeful with reproach, and I called them all limeys. There was a silence, and then someone threw a block. I have no memory of the struggle that followed, but I recall the aftermath. Blocks everywhere, someone crying, me being pulled away by a man who had been called in by the teacher, and he also called me a Yank. The fault for the disturbance was laid on me. The report from the teacher, upon which I was to be punished at home, was 4 words long. He was very naughty. Back in the house we rented, I was told to think about what I had done. My father looked guilty, my mother looked at my father, and I did not think about what I had done. I thought instead that we had come to England on a plane, and that I would go back to one immediately. I had 35 pence saved. My mother said that it was not enough to buy a flight ticket. But I also had my father's 1944 pictorial book of airplanes. I announced that I would build one myself and fly it over the ocean. Beside the house, on the right side, was an alley separated from the yard by a fence. The residents in our neighborhood lived in tight quarters and stored all their old lumber and pieces of furniture neatly behind their homes in the narrow lane. I learned that most of the British Spitfire had been made of wood, which was very encouraging, given my supplies. I decided to piece together an airplane and fly to Maine, where we had friends on the coast. I would go back to America alone and wait for my parents to return. I explained my plan to them and asked for a box of nails. I worked on my project every day after school. My knowledge of aircraft construction was thin, and my book of World War II fighters, America's fighting planes, only pictured them flying, frozen in dogfights with German Focke-Wulf 190s and Japanese Zeros. I had to start with something simple, and I guess the pilots would all must be sitting inside boxes of various sizes. And why wouldn't they be? I began by building a square. This was to be my cockpit. 2 long boards were fixed on either side as wings, and a warped piece of oak window trim was nailed to the front, as close to the center as possible, to serve as a propeller. The frame sat above the ground by 6 inches, the height of 2 bricks I borrowed from a pile left after a patio was torn up and replaced with a rose garden. Neighbors gave me more wood and pieces of used aluminum foil that smelled of bacon, sausage, and fish. A British gentleman inspected my work with sincere curiosity every day. He would always say, "Rather think you'll give Frick some trouble in that beast," after I explained what it was. He said this in the same tone he might be addressing a colonel. I had no idea who he was referring to, but I always agreed that I would. I would tell him that I was to fly to America, and he would nod slowly. I see. You'll be wanting to stop in Greenland for fuel, then," he would say, and continue on his way. It was always as if we had never spoken before, and he always said the same words. I can't remember how long I actually worked on the plane. There was a tail projecting from the rear of the cockpit on a curved leg of a broken table, 2 wings almost matched, glittering with aluminum foil, a propeller that could not spin in front, and a seat made from a wooden box. Someone in the alley had promised me a broken lawnmower engine. I was going to need time to repair it with my hammer, screwdriver, and imagination. After I got the engine, I expected to be able to leave within a few days. I began to make a list of things I would need for the trip. I asked my mother to make some soup. It It was at this point that my father decided to quell my ambition. Besides lunacy, there was impending disappointment that he wished to protect me from. It was unlikely that my plane would fly, even with a broken lawnmower engine symbolically attached to an immobile propeller. My father came out to the alley as I hammered more nails into the boards. The excessive nails were pointless, but it was something that I could do. Every intersection of wood glistened with nail heads. He circled the craft. He paused occasionally as if to remark, but he said nothing. He finally stopped and said, I hate to tell you this. He couldn't look at me, afraid maybe that I might catch him conjuring a story. He kept staring down at the wings. I guess he was going to point out my missing engine, wheels, and windows, all of which I had imagined plans for, but it was something far more dangerous. He was drawing on his own youth, perhaps stories he'd been told as a war baby by his father. You see, he said, airplanes need special metal for their wings. I looked at my fragile collage of aluminum foil donated in pieces by all the neighbors. I had nailed some of them down. The foil had been carefully flattened, but still bore the creases of having been wrapped around dinner plates or balled up. It's a long flight over the Atlantic, Ben. You built a good plane, but without the right kind of metal, the wings could fall off. Why, I asked. I'd used enough nails to stop bullets. Metal fatigue, he said. He was very serious. He explained that heavy winds and the pressure of staying high in the air made wings move and that the joints weakened. Wings could fall off this way. He made no allusions to Icarus, and I would not have understood the reference had he done so. But I thought about plummeting into the ocean halfway to Maine. I studied the wings, and metal fatigue seemed possible now that I thought about it. I think that we should take it apart so no one else flies it, he offered. It was kind of him to pretend that there was any possibility of that. We dismantled the plane, which took about 5 minutes. And I returned the pieces to the places in the alley they had come from, riddled with nails. My father left me with the remaining wreckage and went back inside. I stayed in the alley, peeling the aluminum foil off the wing boards. The older gentleman appeared and stood watching as if he'd forgotten something. I straddled the board and shrugged, picking at shreds of foil nailed to it. What's happened here, then? He said. Metal fatigue, I said. So, things like that happen throughout this. You can see that I'm always trying to overcome my situation by what I have. I never change. I'm the same guy all the time. Is anyone tracking the time? How long before I get pulled off here? I forget how long I'm supposed to be for. Mike, help me, Mr. Wizard.
It's currently 8:18.
What's that?
It's currently 8:18.
8:18? It sounds like late. Is that late? I forget.
That's
Seriously.
till 9.
I have till 9? All right. Fine.
We do Q&A.
Q&A. I'm not going to entertain myself with what I know. Well, you know what? Let me read a poem which will sound very much like me. I occasionally write in all these different genres. I'm a screenwriter, filmmaker. I write poetry, write op-eds, and things like that, simply because there's always different ways to express certain things. So, I'll write, this one right here will make perfect sense now you know a little bit about me. This is called The Discovery of My Tomb. I've already pushed me ground, so you know where I live. Just the sound of the vents rush in the dark morning calm, cats draped over furniture, and the dog so deep in slumber his paws on a dream of running. And I'm wondering how I got so far behind. I mourn the sense of measurements, the dates on the pictures, gravestones, and trophies. I'm more quiet than this house that still needs siding, no trim around the doorways. How is it possible that none of it is done after all this time? Maybe tomorrow I'll return to it, the part I was working on, as wind makes the windows gasp. I could be carving a sarcophagus in the cellar, chipping an empty bed inside a stone with a hammer and chisel where I'll lay one day, the incomplete home above me like cathedrals that took centuries to raise. I imagine they'll add a spire on top for me, stretched as sharp as a spear, hollow and thin, clad in copper, cables cutting through our bedrooms and books to anchor it to the foundations of my crypt, for fear it might tip and drop sideways like a man. All this, and still it will fall. The effort to rebuild, too much for the survivors to undertake. I worry most that I won't finish the lid by then. The epitaph still in draft, the basement left open by the toppled home, rain drowning my remains, the pages kept from my afterlife rotted blank, all my curses empty threats, my canopic jars spilled by looters, medals ripped from my uniform and melted into coins, my sword passed from auction to yard sale, its sheath dented and hilt loose, the blade notched by children playing war. I'll be forgotten by then. Nothing left in the archive, the sixth extinction taking the fish and bees, seas barren and flowers in decline, elders saying it wasn't always so, as sand grinds the wet boundaries, stories becoming religion, civilization unsure what to cherish anymore. My tomb will eventually be discovered, my fragments carried off, the sculpted box winched up and hauled away, displayed empty, its museum eventually neglected, artifacts surrendered, the coffin sold and stolen and filled with someone else, and lost and found and lost until we finally understand the impossibility of empire, the incredible patience and forgetfulness of soil. So, I'm a dark star, but I'm feisty. And this will bring us back up a little bit, but only a little. This is called self-made. I drift sometimes, surrender the need to matter. I can give up briefly, eat lunch, feed the dog, tell myself it's all religion, and it is. But I'm curious and conscious of trying to pretend I don't care. What is all my labor buying me? What if I had no name? The oldest questions we've asked. If we knew for sure that we're all working for nothing, would we stop? Just breathe and blink until we're tired of staring and waiting? Why even ask? The subject can only lead to depression, and we just don't have time for that with all the errands. I want to be self-made, plunge my fingers into whirling gears, clench them without wounds, harvest machinery, rip pistons from engines, wires from poles, throw fistfuls of progress 100 miles to punch holes in highways, scatter corporations, come down like asteroid, come down like judgment. I want to change the horizon, push hills up, gouge the shore with my hands, bury cemeteries, burn the maps, and start again without names, doors, or dates. Leave mesas where cities stood, scrape them flat, make science explain how I did it, all by myself. I'll stop reading at you now, unless you want to laugh a lot more with some darker material. Before we go into the Q&A, I figured I might as well, since we're in the theater, so you should pictures. This is a film that I actually ended up writing while I was finishing Dust to Dust. And I cut a chapter called Light. It's one of the things that I just didn't have enough of a relationship to, all those little electrons hitting me all the time. And so I couldn't really feel the substance of it, couldn't write about it. It's just bright. So I wrote a film called Bright, not realizing that I basically was taking all the ideas of writing that chapter and putting them into a film. And I wanted to play against race, I wanted to play against sex, I wanted to play against all the expectations we have about people, and get back to the human journey, the fear of the unknown, the recovery from it, and also within that, the absolute bravery of living. So I wrote a few characters in, Robert Wisdom, a friend of mine from The Wire, and Eric Menninger, a friend of mine from Generation Kill, two series I've done for HBO as an actor. called them, wrote these things for them against type. And so with a friend, I decorated the house, took it over, and this will be the first scene of that movie. We can talk about this in the Q&A if you're interested. But so you get an idea for how my eye moves. You already know the speed of my voice, right? That's the speed of this book. It isn't a fast book. It's a thoughtful book. You live in it for a while. I do the same thing with film in this particular case. So be prepared for this not to feel like an American movie. Be prepared for nothing to happen, which is jarring and exciting, no asteroids or zombies. And enjoy a few minutes of Bright. Can you hear me up in the command center? You got me.
Something is happening. This is not actually part of the film, although I've done a lot of dark. I'll turn this light off.
About that time. I almost had this one together, but it's missing a fitting. This one's wore out. Yeah, a lot wore out. I'll crash soon. We'll have to go downtown in the morning. Yeah, go out one of these.
Remember, you got that guy coming in first thing.
I remember. Nothing's wrong with his leg, it just isn't right.
I know what he means. Nothing wrong with my eyes, but I can't see.
That's why I can't make starlight. Sometimes you just have to settle for the best you can get.
Don't you ever want to go see the stars?
It's too bright here in the city, you can't see the sky at night.
You have to go where it's dark. You're not going to see the stars from here.
I don't need to say nothing about it. Anyway, the sun's still.
Yeah, well, don't go staring at that too long. You'll go blind. Good night.
Good night. spend more time peeling than eating.
It was a pleasure in discovery.
You already know there's an orange inside. Have you ever peeled one and found something out?
We didn't have oranges where I grew up.
Have you ever gone back
Where?
home?
No, it's a long way from here. On the other side, east across the desert. Road passes through empty land, then prairie, then wheat. Barely a single light on Earth for hundreds of miles in length. The sky lit like a city.
I can't imagine.
Well, you don't have to. It's really bad.
Haven't you ever wanted to go back to the place you started? Someday.
Can't never do that. A child can only go back to that place as a child. I'm something else now. And besides, I figure I wouldn't recognize the place if I saw it again anyway. You know, people long gone and the sounds have probably all changed. Got new. Have you ever been outside this place?
No. You know I haven't.
Look, I was just wondering if you remember from before.
I don't remember anything from before. I don't understand why you keep asking me. I've been here so long, I'm afraid to leave anyway.
Someone said we must travel in the direction of our fear.
That doesn't sound like very good advice.
No, it doesn't.
Wait, what does that even mean? Fear would travel towards safety. So they're saying run away. That's good advice, actually.
No. Means you must travel towards that which frightens you. Become brave.
That's back to bad advice. What if you're afraid of sharks?
The peel never saves the orange.
What you'll learn in this film, we're just going to shoot to the end once they can split up, is that Eric Vinegar, the young guy, was found in a used clothing, Red Cross kind of place, as a child, abandoned, orphaned, we don't know, by Robert Wisdom, the elder man there, who adopts him. He later goes blind. So Robert Wisdom lives in a world of darkness, whereas Eric Vinegar is someone who's grown up afraid of the dark. And the reason he's in the place that Robert finds him, he ran this store that sells used clothing, and it had lights on all night. So the kid went to the one place he could get into and hide in the light. And so he restores lights, and there's always lights in every shot. He's always keeping lights on even during the day. It's the human urge to even be more reliable than nature, because the sun sets, right? So he overcomes that by constantly having light around him. And we build towards Robert Wisdom, who lives in darkness, perpetual darkness, and trying to encourage him to be brave, to face fear, to face uncertainty. And as soon as we get the signal, we can show the end. You good? You gonna make it, everybody? Okay. I know it's slow. It's thoughtful. It's rare, I guess. So here's further along where Eric has to he's going to try to stare at night in LA, which of course you can't see. that goes to the roof of the building where he stores all the white space cells. And it's also written on several layers. It's also a spiritual journey as well. So as it goes up, his back is to the sun, which he does not trust. And in his hand he has a flashlight, which he does. And this is kind of the ascent, right, from which he never returned the same.
No stops.
killed my life. You can see how it's already, right? He's lying in that bed. He's looking at Edison bulb. This is the one bulb that was made with carbon filament. So it's actually organic light. He's underneath. And he was found underneath dresses, the absent mother. There's no women in the film. And so he lies underneath the recreation of the place where he was last safe, symbolic of a mother's dress for a child. So there's symbolism going on like crazy in every shot. That's how I roll. So let's move into the exciting question and answering period for those of you who have survived. And please, if you have to run, I understand, no harm, no foul. I'm so grateful for you to be here to listen to my work and have my mind blown out over all your seats. But I hope you'll stay, because I write very much about kind of the persistence of objects, the memory that's contained within them, the power of them. And when I was in Iowa City, my father was teaching writing at some point. My mother was getting a degree in library science. There's a science to it. And I found out that the United States made war cents. In 1943, the copper that was being mined in the UP, I now live in Michigan, all of that was going to the war effort of making copper for bullets and ship pipes. So they made steel pennies for 1 year, coated them in zinc. It's the only time we ever made a steel piece of currency. And so I took it upon myself, now that you know what I'm like, to collect every one of them. So all of my lawn mowing money and paper route money, et cetera, for the next 5 years went into accumulating every single possible 1943 war cent on Earth. And as you leave today, I realized that I only need one for my daughter and both my daughters, and I need one for my pyramid, because you know, I need a pyramid, yeah? Now you understand. So, I'm spreading it back out again. I have enough, I think, for every single person here to take one of my childhood 1943 steel war cents with you, and to kind of take a piece of my history, much like I feel my memoir and my writing is. Like every writer is trying to give a piece of them away, right? Something enduring. And I wrote a whole piece in the book, which is why I think it's kind of pertinent that you have one of these things about exactly this. It made a page, and we've been talking about writing, of course, the whole time I've been here. I wrote that piece because there was one of my pennies sitting on my desk, and suddenly it connected to the immensity, which I'm always trying to talk about with writing. How does the small thing attach to everything? My grandfathers were in World War II. My grandmothers were nurses in World War II. I was not in World War II, but I was on the way. I was born during the Tet Offensive, essentially. All these different things that I'm connected to, this penny being connected to war, but more important to me even than that, is that it's connected to the earth. Someone had to dig to get to steel, to refine zinc. Someone had to make this object, which on it is nothing but symbolism, right? It's got wheat on it. It's a wheat penny. Symbolic of a different time in America. Not so much right here, right, though. The reason I thought of it, of course, is because the Palouse is wheat fields. So this is for you. I'll put this out with you.
That's the right word.
All right, man, God, what powers. So I'll put this out with you. If you have to leave, no worries. Please pick one up and make sure every one of you takes one away with you. I think that would be great. So, just in case any of you need to leave, I'll take this up with me. And I'll be right back.
Spotlight is on.
All right. What do you want to know? Questions, comments, or remarks?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Colonel, thanks for joining us tonight.
I have no rank here, thank you.
Why Vassar, besides the fact that there were probably a lot of women there, okay?
It was a women's college.
It was.
Okay.
And have you been able to go back, and were you able to go back and speak to them about your combat experiences or your experiences as a Marine officer? Not as an artist, but as a Marine.
The question is that we go back to Vassar to talk about the war experience, and I have, yeah. I read that very part, of course, because how could I not, you know? But yeah, I've gone back and I've been at many places. I do a lot of veterans work. I'm part of Words After War, Voices from War, veterans writing programs, NEH grants for veteran writing, and Theater of War, where I play Odysseus every once in a while, which of course is all about the message to the young future soldier who is going to be betrayed. The Greeks have been working on that stuff for a while. They've been kind of quiet, not a whole lot of new Greek plays. But luckily they carved the other ones in stone or something, so we've got them lying around. So yeah, I participate heavily in veteran work to align their experience with the humanities, which is where it's going to be expressed, I think, most effectively.
And again, why? How did you end up at Vassar, and why did you choose Vassar?
Studio art best, studio art major. I was looking for art school. I wasn't looking for West Point. And I'm still an artist. I still illustrate books and take photographs and make movies. You can see that this is very much about photography, right? I shot that whole movie with a Canon 5D. It's the cheapest thing on earth. The whole movie, because I got my friends to work with me, it was $10,000. It's a 40-minute film. I owe my friend $10,000 now, but I got to make the film. So, you use what you have. I have artists. So, I went there because I drove through those gates in Vassar and I was like, England. I like England. And I surprised myself by getting in. I think they're still, feeling badly about that. Every institution makes horrible mistakes, for which they can never recover. I'm proud to be that. So, and I met my wife there, and promptly ruined her life. I'm curious enough that I guess she stays for what's going to be next. You have to like surprises if you're going to hang around with me for a while. Anything else? Sure.
Where have you made your home in Michigan and why?
My wife is a historian, and she got the only job in America for a historian that wasn't in Georgia at the time, and it was in Michigan. So I said, back up the cast, we're going to Michigan. And, we moved into I wanted some space. I just come back from my second tour, and, what you find out, of course, is I lived with my parents in this book. And so I wanted to recreate my childhood in some ways, which is I lived in farmland in upstate New York, so we bought a 80-acre wreck, just a wreck. This is just before the crash. So everything was overpriced. And if they didn't actually inspected this place, they would have said, yes, you can buy it if you will burn it. And put some kind of double wide here so you can live in a place which is actually, sterile. And I've been working on it ever since. As you can tell, I really should have been focusing on my sarcophagus. I'm hoping that people will finish it after I'm gone and put the spire up for me and at least give my wife a decent kitchen and bathroom. It's all part of the deal with my temple. Gotta have a good kitchen and bathroom. Anything from the great Psalm of Jordan, even Be brave. I probably have all of you for class in the last couple of days. Yeah.
Why did you join the Marines?
I wanted to be a knight. You should read this. It's all about, when you're young, there's the magic, mythology, and romance to all those things, right? The purity of an idea is is reliant upon your inexperience to be true. So I wanted to be that. Who will go forth into uncertainty and endangerment? Sounds exactly like my kind of gig. Who will risk all? And you hope you get a just mission. If you get a rack, well, that sucks to be you. I'm sorry. But that was my intention. You know, I knew there was going to be a tribe of people doing this one thing, and that they would be sent into those kind of conditions. And I thought, of all of us, since we're all volunteers here, that I would be best equipped to be thrown into chaos, because I operate well there in my own mind. And so I sought that, you know. And then, of course, everything else happens after that. And then you're forced to write books. That's the thing they don't tell you in the Marine Corps. This will eventually result in the writing of a great deal of language. We would get rid of so many people that there would be, this office would be empty for a while. Sign here. This is your book contract. Go dig holes and look forward to your book. It will be graded heavily.
If you hadn't made it as a Marine, how do you think you would have felt, or how do you think your life would have turned out?
I would have missed that part of me. I knew I would have regretted not having that experience. I sought it out for that reason. Right? I had plenty of options. I was supposed to go to MTV and do those little video things in between videos. Really sexy little ridiculous things that made no sense but looked great. And, you know, maybe I'd be making great big films with money, and my kitchen would be finished, and all kinds of stuff. But I figured while I was young enough to handle the pressure and endurance of those kinds of challenges, that I should take my time. And of course, by the time I got out, all my skills were antiquated. No one needed me anymore for what I did, which is mostly manual art, and they're all digitized by then. So yeah, much of who I am, much like everything you are, all your decisions, you begin to gather your baggage as you go along. I always inform who you are as you move. But there's something also about who you are that's a direct result of the choices you made. You know, and you've made choices that were born out of something organic inside you. I think I was meant for certain things that I've. Luckily, my parents, who couldn't have been more disappointed by my choice to leave the arts and carry rifles. I can only imagine what those discussions were like back on the hill in Sherwood, New York. You know, the great gift they gave me as parents, and they were wonderful parents, was they let me be who I was. They knew that I sought danger. They knew that I had this in me, that it was part of who I am. Just from being 7 years old, they knew. Being 5 years old, they knew. And they let me. They didn't tell me I was wrong for wanting things. They didn't tell me I was wrong for wanting to be an artist. They didn't tell me I was wrong for being a Marine. What it did, and the things that you don't really realize in the selfishness of being yourself, is what it does to them. You know, I didn't worry about their worrying. I just left. And that's something you have to figure out later on, especially when you have a child of your own, which I do. It changes everything, you know. The parent's one job, the one job a parent has, is to protect the child, keep them alive. The military and war excludes them from their job entirely, takes every aspect of their defense away from there. And so, for them, I can't even imagine what it's like being at home while I just left. You know, I was able to divorce myself from their feelings because of, you know, my focus. And that's tough to deal with, I think. You know, especially since they lived just long enough for me to come back alive. And now I can't apologize. Anything else?
What was the most difficult aspect of writing a memoir?
Difficult aspect of writing a memoir. Well, first of all, I had to find myself. You know, I began a memoir really was as an attempt to find my parents because I was lost in the boat. And the place that I could find them was in my memories, which of course is memoir. And it's always the question of what do you include? You know, is this moment necessary? Because there's lots of moments in your life, right? The older you get, the more moments you have to pick from. And you have to thin that down to something sensible. You have to create a narrative that makes some kind of clean move through all the debris of your life. And so that's why I came up with the organization that my memoir has. It's very unconventional. And I cut away half of the writing that I did for it, which I've talked in the writing programs about how hard that is. You really mill something beautiful, and then you realize it's redundant, or it's just forcing itself into the book because something else really covers the territory and you gotta get rid of it. So a lot of it was the trouble with editing more than it was generating material. I kind of have a facility for writing a scene. You know, it comes to me that way. All these images you saw there, you know, I was articulating, it was very easy for me to articulate. It's just, it comes to me that way. But then cutting it back and making those choices was very difficult. And I was grateful in the final stages for having an editor who just reads more than I do and is smarter. He knows more about books and structure and mistakes made in the past by many hundreds of writers who basically said, you know, this works, this doesn't. And the most important part of it was that they gave me a sense of pace. You know, I could have stayed in some places too long, and the editor's always counting the minutes. How long is this piece? You got to cut away from here now. It's the same thing film does, right? It's time to read the scene. And the book has a real pace to it. It has a real, the match is almost a movie. They're kind of written in the same feeling, the same moment, and the same time, actually. I mean, both of them, they came out at the same time. So, you know, that's hard. And also you have to be truly honest about yourself, because you want to do something, you want to be better than you were. You don't want to have made mistakes. You don't want to have these things that you've done public sometimes. But you have to be honest. If you believe any things that I said, then you have to know that I honestly, this came from the honesty. It wasn't artifice. It wasn't constructed for you. And you know, that's something a lot of people have problems with memoir. I didn't at first because I didn't really even know who I was writing for. I wasn't editing myself away from anybody because, first of all, I didn't think anyone was going to read it. But secondly, that I was early in the process, and then we had a book contract. Things changed. That now, okay, someone's going to read this, but it didn't change what I was writing. I never worried about the reader, how the reader felt about me. But I wanted most was that the reader saw what I saw and was able to take it into their own life. If I'm talking about soil, I want someone to walk out and look at the soil and go, huh, I hadn't thought of it that way. We're all connected to this. Stone, interesting. Trees, wow, yeah, trees. Big natural clock. Every year, another rain. Huh. If I can just make you slow down for a second, look at yourself, and then look backward. I think we're so fixated on what's next that we forget to do that. And this memoir was designed to make everyone turn around for a second and check their shadow. Kind of answer. Yeah.
This might be an odd question.
I love those.
What does the unknown look like to you? And how does it make you feel?
What's the what?
What does the unknown look like to you, and how does it make you feel?
It makes me want to go there. The question is, what does the unknown look like, and how does it make you feel? It makes me want to head into it. I'm not that interested in what I know. I said this in a few classes, because I know it. I'm fascinated by uncertainty. I'm fascinated by things. I shy away from a few subject matters. You know, I'm not particularly fascinated by how an oboist plays. There's certain uncertainty which I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm never going to know. I'll hear it, and that's great. There's no oboe in Van Halen. I'm checking out. You know? But there's things that are larger than that. You know, I want to know what it's like in space, even though there's nothing there, but there's something there. You know, I want to know what it's like under the ocean. I mean, all the way. I want to walk on the bottom of a shelf. I want to have submarines pass over. You know, the submarine looks like from underneath. Nobody really knows what that looks like. You know, I'll ride a damn whale. That's the kind of stuff that, you know, that fascinates me. What is it like to be under that kind of pressure? What is it like to have no pressure? What is it like to live in all these places? I talked about it earlier just in the classes. I had just seen the Palouse for the first time. You think I'm not going to write about how weird that is? You know, big piles of dirt everywhere. You know, and I wish I could come back for all your seasons where it's golden wheat and then it's cut and then it's plowed, which I can see now. There's the winter wheat going in now. The whole place gets green in time for winter. You know, what the hell's going on here? And furthermore, of course, if you got mounds, I want to know what all you people buried. Because I'm always looking for the bones. So, yeah, I guess it's a hard way to answer. What do I want to know about the unknown? I want to make it known. What time is it, by the way? I can go for weeks like this, I'll tell you.
9:04.
9:04, okay, so thank you all for coming.